My name is Priya Chaya, and I am the Associate Director of Content here at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. This webinar is part of a series we are calling Navigating the Unexpected, Fundraising and Job Searching Strategies for Historic Preservationists. As you know, this year has brought unexpected and difficult changes brought on by government actions, which continue to impact the people and organizations essential to the work of saving places. These challenges include a loss of key funding sources and significant workforce reductions from every corner of the field. As the National Trust continues to respond to these challenges and advocate for historic preservation at all levels, we at Preservation Leadership Forum realize the need to support those in the field with information, expertise, and resources. In addition to this webinar series, the National Trust would also like to invite those of you on the call that are job seekers or job supporters to use our LinkedIn group as a platform to connect. Colleen, who's minding the chat, will drop the link in during this conversation, and I'll share that information with you in the follow-up email as well. While our LinkedIn group continues to be a forum for events and information, we wanted to encourage those looking for a job right now to use the group as a tool to build connections and share more about what you are looking for. So, like Colleen said, feel free to introduce yourself and what you might be looking for in our LinkedIn group, but also make sure to tell us where you're calling in from today. Today's webinar is the third planned session in a series of 4. We'll share the link in the chat where you can find the recording and resources for the first session, which was an AMA with an Ask Me Anything with our talent acquisition specialist, and materials and resources, including the slide deck and article related to the second session on fundraising, which we unfortunately had to cancel, postponed due to illness, but we're hoping to reschedule that later in the year. The final session, which will take place next Thursday, will focus on LinkedIn specifically, and we'll share more information about that at the end. Now, logistics. We will take questions from the audience during the webinar using the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You are welcome to submit them at any point during the session, but we're going to start with one of the pre-submitted questions first, just to get things going. But you are also encouraged to communicate to each other through the chat function. Many of you submitted questions ahead of time, so our speakers have actually used that as a way to build out the session. So hopefully many of them will be answered as they present in a moment. The closed captioning function is enabled for this webinar. And I also wanted to note that because it's a departure for our webinars, we are not going to share the recording of the session, but we will share the slide deck and follow-up links and places to get more information in the recording link that Colleen will share, but then also in the follow-up email. So just check your email for all of the information you need afterwards. And then finally, this webinar is made possible by members of Preservation Leadership Forum, the professional membership program of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And we thank those of you that are here with us today. Next slide, Rhonda. Today's presentation is actually done by 2 of my wonderful colleagues, Nikki Van, the Director of Grants and Awards Program, and then Haley Powell-Kelly, who's the Associate Director of Institutional Giving. Both of them are knowledgeable, and I'm so glad that they are here to share their expertise with you today. So with that, I'm going to pass things off to Haley and Nikki to present, and I'll be back later with the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Priya. Hi, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today to talk about grants. Just so that you understand where Nikki and I are coming from, my role at the National Trust is on the grant seeking side. I'm part of the development team seeking funding for the National Trust, and Nikki is on our grant making side. So we have a number of grant making programs. So Nikki reviews a lot of grants and I write a lot of grants. So we're trying to bring those 2 perspectives to our presentation today. We're also going to be really talking about most grants from whether it's foundation or government, et cetera, typically are for nonprofits. So we're going to be speaking mainly from a perspective of opportunities for 501c3s. There are, of course, opportunities for individuals, often in the case of scholarship and things like that. But today's focus will be for organizations seeking grants. One of the biggest questions I think that comes up whenever we talk about grants is, how do I find a grant? Where do I even begin? So I wanted to start by just saying it takes time. That may be a frustrating answer to hear. Grants are definitely a long game. It takes time to find funders. It takes time to apply. It also takes time to hear back from funders. So it is something where you want to just keep that in mind as you approach your fundraising, that this is something that takes time. Doing prospect research is something you really do need to dedicate time to go through, to weed things out, to find funders that really align with the work that you're doing. But if you spend that time, then it makes the proposals that you're submitting that much stronger because you already hopefully have an alignment with the funding opportunity. I also encourage you to think local when you're seeking funders. There are, of course, the big national foundations and the ones you hear on, the NPR break, et cetera. And those can be really great opportunities. But a lot of times there are opportunities in your own backyard. And that can be family foundations. That can be funders who are funding work in your community. And that can be helpful because they may already be familiar with your work. They may be familiar with the community that you're serving, and they may already be interested in investing in the work that you're doing. So think about local. That also applies to government. I know that everything at the federal level is challenging at the moment, and some of that is trickling down to the state and local level, but there are still opportunities through things like the Department of Economic Opportunity. It has a different office name in every state, but be in touch with your council members, with your local government, with your county supervisors, and find out what opportunities may exist there as well. I also say to look to your peers. Who else is doing work that's similar to you and who is funding them? That is really a great way to get some new ideas, to see where there may be a funding opportunity for your organization. When I previously worked at an arts organization, I saved every single playbill. I still take pictures of every donor wall in a museum exhibit because I want to make sure those are funders that I'm checking out for the grants that I'm trying to fund. So keep an eye on who's out there. And I also encourage you to search your own network. And what I mean by that is talking to your board, talking to your volunteers, talking to people in your community, letting them know about the work that you do and seeing where they may have a connection or know about a foundation or another opportunity that could be out there. One of the biggest things with fundraising in general is that it's about relationship building. It's also about communicating. Each one of you has something that you deeply care about. That's why you're here. There's something that you want money for, and you're probably already really good at talking about it. And that is so much of what searching your network for funders can be, is really continuing to express that and get people onto your team. So just keep that in mind if you're intimidated by the idea of fundraising, is that it's really more about expanding your network. I wanted to put these last couple of resources on here for anyone who is not familiar with them. Foundation Directory and GuideStar used to actually be separate entities, and they are now combined under Candid, which is a website. Foundation Directory Online is a very powerful search engine. They used to have offices around the country as well. I think most of those closed during the pandemic. It is a paid subscription service, but you may have access to it through your local library. This is a tool that lets you search by your location or by your what type of funding you're looking for, what type of organization you are, and it can have a huge host of resources. You can see the funders, who they fund, amounts, how to apply, things like that. If you don't have access to it through your organization, check with your local library. I was able to search my own local library the other day and found that they have it. I have to visit a specific branch to use it, but if you set aside a day to go, librarians are also the best. They'll always help you get set up with that. But that's a great resource. Some also have what's called Grant Select. To be honest, I have not used Grant Select, but it serves a similar function where you can search for different types of grants. University libraries are also a great resource. Many university libraries may have access to these same research databases. GuideStar is a free website that you can sign up for, and that gives you access to 990 forms. So if you have a foundation you're interested in, you can search them on GuideStar, read their 990, which if you've never looked at a 990, don't be intimidated. It is a tax form, so you got to just make your way through it. But you can often see who they have funded in that fiscal year, how much, and oftentimes there is information in there about their application process. So keep an eye on those as some great places to find funders. Next slide, and I will turn things over to Nikki.
All right, thank you, Haley. So Haley just shared some great information about where you may be able to find grantors. And I'm going to talk a little bit about common proposal components. So things that you will see across most applications or proposals that you're putting in, and just give some tips or some pitfalls that we see people fall into when they're writing their grant applications. Again, I'm coming from this as a funder. We receive hundreds of proposals every year, give hundreds of grants every year. So I see a lot of applications. I see from the list of folks who've joined that some of our grantees, I see some familiar names. So I think we have some grantees on the call with us. So welcome, thanks for joining us. So I'm going to come from that perspective, and Haley, feel free to jump in if you have other things from a grant writing side that you want to emphasize. But just kind of right off the top, basic things, your organization's history, what your mission and the current work that you're doing are things that you'll often need to summarize or address in some way in a proposal. And the mission is something that we do ask for and we pay attention to, but know that it's like your mission is your mission, and it's not always going to perfectly align with the funder. And I think that when that doesn't happen, that's where in your narrative later on, you're going to need to make a tie between what your mission is, what your goals are, and the funder and what their mission is, and how those two, if they on their face aren't obviously connected, how they can work together, and how your mission can help further their philanthropic goals, and how their philanthropy can help further your mission. So did we skip a slide, Rhonda? Thank you. The number 4. Thank you. Wait, yeah. So sorry, this is the slide I was supposed to talk about, finding funders, which I was happy to dive in on that other one, but this again leads off with your mission, so I didn't realize till the second bullet that I was straying from my planned remarks. So again, connect your mission or your project to their mission, what they're trying to fund. One example of how you can do this. So we sometimes receive applications from a social service organization, and maybe they're providing meals to people in their communities, or they're providing outreach services to homeless population in their community. And on its face, if you read their mission, they're not a preservation organization, but they are housed in a historic building, and they have maintenance needs, and they want to do right by their building. And so they make that connection that our building is critical to the work that we do. Having our building well maintained and is important to the work that we do. It allows us to do that work. So your funding can help secure our future, and then can help serve people in our community. And that's a pretty powerful statement. On its face, that soup kitchen and preservation might not seem like a natural fit, but they're very much intertwined for those organizations. So this gets to the second point, paying attention to philanthropic interests. So again, it may be obvious in some cases. We're the National Trust for Historic Preservation. We care about historic preservation. You have a historic resource that you're seeking funding for. So that's a pretty obvious alignment of philanthropic interest and project type. But there might be organizations out there, funders out there, where it's not as obvious of a tie, but there's still an interest there. And so, maybe through your, again, flip it around. So through your historic site, maybe you're providing education, and it's focused on math and sciences. And so there might be math and science funders that can help support your programmatic work, even if you view yourself primarily as a preservation organization. There may be corporations where the corporation has a philanthropic arm, and the corporation might be selling soda, but their philanthropy might be focused on something that's completely unrelated to selling soda. So doing that research and trying to find those ties, back to what Haley was saying, using some of those resources to find those ties is a good thing to look out for. Aligning the amount of your ask is very important. So a lot of times funders will either clearly state in their guidelines what their funding amounts are, or at least a range for their funds, or they might specifically request a certain amount be asked for by you in your organization, but sometimes they don't. So, or the range is so broad that you don't really have a good sense of what to ask for. So in that case, we would advise you to look back at previous funding that they've done to get a sense of what size grants they really do give. So if they typically give $20,000 grants and you're coming in with a $500,000 request, they might look at that and think, that's beyond what we can do. And they might, not look at it as closely as something that is better aligned with the amount that they can fund. So not just aligning the amount you're asking for, but aligning your budget to call out specifically, like, this is what your funding would be going towards, and make it very specific so they know where their money will be going. So, along those lines, reading the restrictions, what do organizations fund? What don't they fund? If they clearly state they don't fund something, don't ask for it. Because from a reviewer's point of view, to me, that means you didn't read our guidelines and you're not paying that close attention. And what's that going to mean as a grantee? Like, what other ramifications might that have going forward if, at least when you're supposed to be putting your best foot forward, it doesn't appear that you're reading things. So that's a very basic thing, but you'd be surprised how often we do see it. And then there's always going to be kind of gray areas in guidelines. There's always something. Every grant round, we get asked a question that we haven't thought of that before. Can I do X with your money? You look at our guidelines, it's not always super clear yes or no. So in those cases, we always tell people to reach out to us, tell us what you're trying to do, and we'll let you know. Like, if we tried to list everything that you can and can't do with our money, it would be a very long list. And so we try through the spirit of our guidelines to lay that out, but not every case is going to be covered. And that's where reaching out to a funder in advance, asking in advance, it could just save you a lot of time. Because if it's something that isn't going to fly, you don't want to spend your time writing a proposal that is not going to go anywhere, where a 5-minute call might have just saved you all that work. So finally, like, when you're looking for funders, when you're trying to figure out what a good fit is, your project, their money, don't be afraid to reach out to them. I will say that, if you're going to reach out, it's better to reach out weeks or months in advance of a grant deadline, not hours beforehand, because not always going to be able to respond if it's hours before the deadline. It also, I think, disadvantages a bit if you wait to the last minute to reach out, because it doesn't make it appear that you have thought this through, that you've been planning for this. It does, even if you have been, it does make it seem to the funder that maybe this is a kind of a rushed and last minute request. So, we recommend kind of building, and Haley will talk about this a little bit more, but building relationships well in advance of an ask can benefit you. Next slide.
Yeah, I actually just yesterday reached out to a foundation that I was sure we were going to be a great fit for, because their website said they funded historical preservation in Virginia. And I was like, no problem. We got a site in Virginia, need some capital work. And it turns out not on their website was that they don't fund Northern Virginia, which is where this site was. So the email I sent saved me hours of time of preparing an entire proposal, which would have stung a lot more if that had been a response after all that work. So these are just some common proposal components. Now, many proposals these days are actually done via an online portal, so that you will actually have specific questions that are prompts that you need to answer, oftentimes with a word or character limit that you do want to pay very close attention to. As a side note, if you're new to using portals, I recommend doing all of your answers in a Word doc or similar so that you can do all your editing and check all your character counts and have a copy to save before you copy paste into a portal. Within those questions, everybody's a little different. Every funder is going to have their own way of phrasing certain things, but these are the essential components of what they're usually looking for. If you're writing your own proposal and submitting that to them, these are the different categories of information you would want to have there. Each one of these we could talk on and on and on about, so I'm going to keep this pretty high level. And at the end of this, we'll have other resources you can look to dig into each of these a little bit more. As Nikki was saying, relating your organization to whatever the foundation or funder funds is going to be key. The other part about the org history and the current work is to show that you will be a good steward of their money, that you are a reliable organization, that you have a presence in your community, that you have done projects like this before. It's basically a chance to say that that doesn't mean you need to be huge. That doesn't mean you need to have been around for a long time, but using your org history and your current work and your mission to show that you are a really good fit and that you are a reliable grantee. When it gets to the problem statement or statement of need, the way to approach that is not what your problem is, but rather the problem that your organization and your work is seeking to solve. So if I have a capital grant because I need a new roof, my problem is not that the roof is leaking, and my need is not that I need a new roof. The problem is what is this roof on this building? It's necessary so that the building is still there. And why is it important that the building is still there? What is the building a part of? Is it part of programming for my community? Is it part of telling a specific history? What is it that my organization is doing that is adding to my community as nonprofits? And then the building is part of why we need the building fixed so that we can continue to do that. Most grantors are looking for there to be a reason for their money to be given, that the money is being used for not just a singular paying of a bill, but rather for a greater purpose. So you want to make sure you connect your work to that greater purpose. You always want to have clear goals and objectives. You don't need to have a laundry list. You could have one goal and like 2 objectives, and that would be fine depending on what the project is. But you want to clearly state what those goals are. And the goal is usually the bigger picture thing, and the objectives are the steps you're going to take to meet that goal. Then comes your work plan. This is like literally, what are you doing? Who's doing it? What is happening? What is your timeline? Where is it taking place? All of the steps of your work. Sometimes that can be very, very simple, and sometimes that can be very complex, depending on what the grant is funding. This is a chance, again, for you to show off your staff, for you to show off the expertise of the people who may be executing this work. Having a very clear timeline is a really key component of a proposal, and making sure that the timeline and what's written in the narrative are telling the same story, and that they also line up with your budget. I'll reiterate that point probably again, but making sure again that if somebody is looking at this, they know nothing about your organization, they know nothing about the work they do, they can read that and understand, who are you, what are you asking money for, and what are you going to do with that money? It needs to be very clear. Clarity is so important, and being concise as possible is also really important. Then you usually want to include something about evaluation and sustainability. Evaluation is, how are you going to define success, and how are you going to measure that? So thinking that through when you're planning your programs is a really valuable thing to just have as a best practice anyways, but you will be wanting to articulate that to the funder so that you can show how you're really tracking what the work is that you're doing. Sustainability is related to really what's being funded, and are you going to be able to continue to fund it after the grant period? But it's also about the sustainability of the organization. Do you have regular fundraising as part of your model? What is your, is this capital project going to allow you to reach more people? Do you have a funding plan in place for the additional expenses that may come from that? And again, most funders, they want to see that their money is going to not only be used effectively in the short term, but that it's not just one-off and then there's no result. They like to see that there is a long-term impact, even if it's not the program lasting forever and ever, but that it's something that is going to be sustained over time. The budget is a very important part of any proposal, and making sure your budget is clear and that it tells the same story that's in your narrative. I have reviewed grants before, and I'm sure Nikki has stories as well of like, you read this proposal and then you get to the budget and you're like, but where is the thing they were talking about? Where's the person that's leading all the work? Or you see in the budget line items for stuff that is not brought up at all. So make sure that those are telling the same story, because there are some funders that the first thing they're going to look at is the budget. And so making sure there's one on this wall.
I often look at the budget first, yeah.
So making sure it's really clear, all of those different components are there in all of the different pieces of your proposal. The last thing I will mention are attachments. Attachments can range from, they want to just see your organization budget. Maybe they want your IRS letter and that's it. Other times you may have opportunities to include work samples. You may include proposals or estimates for work. You might include your list of your board, different things like that. Always, always, always make sure you read what the requirements are as soon as you are deciding you're going to apply, because oftentimes the attachments take longer than you think to compile. You may have a lot of these on file already, things like your 990 form, for example, or your current year's operating budget you probably have. But there may be other stuff that needs time to put together, including if you need letters of support from other partners. So just make sure the attachments should not be an afterthought. They should not be just extra fluff. They should all be compelling and related to the work that you're applying for, or meeting the requirements that have been outlined by the organization. I realize that like a list of board of trustees is not necessarily compelling, but if they ask for it, make sure that it's there. And then I think we can go on to the next slide.
Yeah, can I make one on the attachment piece? You mentioned letters of recommendation, and I think different funders probably have different approaches and views on letters of endorsement. But one thing we see a lot and catches reviewers' eyes is when we ask, let's say we accept 3 letters of recommendation. Sometimes we'll get 3 letters that are essentially the same letter, and it's very clear that the applicant has written a letter for somebody in the community to sign off on, but those letters will have they'll all have the exact same language in them, or like such minor changes that it's pretty obvious that that's what's happening. Just think about that as you're reaching out to folks for letters. I think it's understandable to provide them language, because they might support you as an organization and generally feel good about you, but not know specifics about the project. That's understandable and that's fine. But again, if you have 3 letters all coming in exactly the same, it's very obvious. So just wanted to put that out there.
What I usually do when we have to get multiple letters is I have a bullet list of what we need in the letter that I send to them so that they can put stuff in their own words. So I'll say like, please express that you support this project. Please give a sentence or 2 about your work and our relationship, things like that, so that you're covering your bases. But yeah, you're not, and you're giving them less work to do to write the letter. But yeah, you're not having like carbon copies of the same letter in your application, which looks a little silly.
Yeah. And I think that for some funders and some, funding juries that I've been on, I think that the assumption is that the letter from the mayor or the congressman are going to be the impactful letters. And a lot of times what we see is that the impactful letter is the letter from the community member who, brings their child to this site and has fond memories, or they receive services directly from this site. Sometimes like those more personal letters from just a community member who the reviewer will not know or have heard of can be as impactful, if not more so, than that letter from the congressman. So just kind of think about that too, like get to kind of know your funder and maybe what their interests are, and what they're really looking to do with their funding, and think about, be intentional about who you ask to provide those testimonials for you. So that brings us to the general tips section, which I'm definitely supposed to do this slide, so we're good. So as Haley was saying, like every component of your project, of your application should tell the same story. And I've just yesterday I was reading an application where in our application we ask for a brief project summary, so just a few sentences that summarize very high level what your project is. Then we ask for a more detailed step, you know, all those who, what, when, where, and why section. And so I'm reading the proposal. Brief project summary is focused on interior work for a historic site. The photos are all photos of interior work that needs to be done. Then I get to the detailed project description, and it's all about the landscape and hiring a landscape consultant. And then the budget is also for that consultant. So which project is it? Is this an interior project? Is this a landscape project? I wasn't sure. It's not going to be funded because it's not clear. So that was a very clear example where every component should tell the same story. But the budget is one that often, as Haley noted, can seem to come out of left field when you're reading a description, then you get to the budget and there's nothing in the description reflected in the budget. We also see that a lot with photos where somebody might be, again, asking for an exterior project and they submit all interior photos, or they're submitting very generalized photos when they're asking for a very specific thing to be funded that they could visually show us. So that all just, like, none of these things maybe are the reason that you won't get funded, but if there are enough of them, even if they're small, that can all add up. You know, again, small thing, but also a very big thing, proofread. And relatedly, don't rely on spell check or artificial intelligence to do the reading and writing for you, especially if you're not going to carefully proofread. I've seen applications that have clearly been written by AI because it's almost like the prompt is kind of almost still in the answer. So just, you know, it's new technologies, we're all getting used to it, but just be very aware that these are, at least for now, humans reading your proposals. So make sure that you're giving it that you know, careful once over. Funders, different reviewers from different, even within the same funder organization, may approach how they review an application differently. So providing both qualitative and quantitative evidence for why your project, why your organization, why you are the one who should be funded, those two things are good both to put in because they might land differently with a different reviewer. Like I might be very focused on the qualitative impacts of a project. I might care about the people that are being served and you know, the way that the community feels about something. But my coworker who's also reading the same project might come from a very different mindset and want to see that quantitative evidence. And so as much as you have both, weaving them both in is always a good thing to do. Practicing good stewardship. So this idea that, you know, if you're going to have questions, make sure that you're reaching out well in advance of the deadline. If you receive the grant, say thank you. If you receive the grant, make sure that you're completing your paperwork on time. And if you're not, reach out and explain why, ask for an extension. Just be in touch with your funder or your potential funder. And, you know, don't just do it when it's the deadline's approaching, but having touch points throughout the year, you know, just to kind of let folks know that you're still around, you're still interested in them, make them still be interested in you. Just good general stewardship throughout the year always makes the funder feel, you know, appreciated, and that can go a long way. It's this one, the jargon, acronyms, making assumptions. We see that a lot in some of the proposals to the National Trust because we are funding historic preservation. There's a lot of jargon in preservation. There's a lot of acronyms. And for the most part, staff of our organization will know what those are. But sometimes we have donor advised funds where a donor is reading the applications as well as staff, and they might not be as familiar with those terms. The other thing we see a lot is people making assumptions about their historic site and its importance, and assuming that the reviewer, the person reading this, is going to just know the site and know why it's important. But as a national funder, funding projects all across the country, we're never going to know every site. And so you need to tell us why your site is historic, why it's important, why it was important historically, why it's still important now, how it's serving the community, why it needs to be preserved. I think I touched on this before, but don't wait until the last minute to ask your questions, to start your application. So on our side, with our system, we can see how many drafts are in progress, how many people are actively applying for an application at any given point. We can see when those were started. We can see when they were submitted. We know most people wait till about a week before to actually do work, at least in the system. They may be following Haley's guidance to, draft their proposal in Word, and then they're putting it in. But we can see that week leading up to the application deadline is definitely when 80% of people apply. But what trips people up, and I think what can be frustrating for staff, is when somebody is reaching out 2 hours before the deadline to say, I tried to access your system and maybe I had a password at one point and now I can't get into it. Can you help me? And it's kind of, we can try, and if we're available, yes, but we're not always going to be available. And so just knowing that you can get in, knowing you can access things, do that all as soon as you feel that you might apply, so that you know that you're set, so you're not in that situation. And then finally, and probably the hardest part for anybody, is don't take rejection personally. It's hard. I know all of your sites are wonderful and we should be funding every single one of them, but we just don't have the money. And so sometimes it's, sometimes we can give you very concrete feedback of, well, your application budget was for interior work, but your narrative and pictures were all for exterior work. Okay, so you know why you didn't receive the funding. Sometimes it's not that straightforward. Sometimes it's, we have $5,000 to fund in New York State and we've received $50,000 of requests. And so we have to look and see, well, which of these best aligns with our mission, or which of these is like the most likely to have the impact that we're looking for. And it's not necessarily that your project isn't a good, it's almost always the case that it's not that your project wasn't a good project or worthy of funding. It's just that there's not enough money to go around from any foundation. So don't take it personally, especially don't take it out on foundation staff, because that does happen and it's doing you no favors. And just view it as an opportunity to practice that good stewardship, to reach out, ask for feedback, maybe get a better sense. Okay, so you only had $5,000 for this funding cycle, but does your fiscal year renew at some point? And when is that? And do you have then fresh pools of money available, which is what happens to us. We renew our fiscal year every year on July 1st. So that first grant round, our June 1st deadline, we always have the most money available because our endowments are renewing. So, it's getting to know that funding cycle of the funder and practicing that stewardship. Haley, anything to add on any of these?
I will just reiterate that it can be like a punch in the gut, especially when you just thought you definitely were going to get it. But to remember that sometimes also a no is actually a not right now. And so to definitely reach out, to invite them to stuff, invite them to come to your organization, invite them to tour the capital project that you're working on, invite them to things, engage with them as much as you can, so that, and to, again, find out when is a good time to ask again. Because it is often there just isn't enough funding to go around. That's the hard part. All right, I think we'll go to our next slide. So these are just some additional resources, and I've already seen some people dropping others in the chat, so please keep doing that. These are just ones that I have personally found helpful over the years when I'm, getting into grant writing. If you're new to grant writing, if you want to brush up your skills, Candid has a lot of free webinars that really dive into a lot of the topics that we've covered today on just like this kind of real 2-minute level, that you can get much deeper into. There are also lots of other online resources. There's a lot that are free, so I encourage you to look for that before you shell out a bunch of cash for a grant writing course, although feel free to do that should you be inclined. The next 3 are books that I have found helpful. There's multiple editions, I think, of all 3 of these. Guide to Proposal Writing and Fundraising for Social Change give kind of an overview. Fundraising for Social Change has also more than just grant writing in it. And Winning Grants Step by Step is really more of a workbook. So if you are very new at this and you're not sure where to start, there are some great real step by step, as the title says, of what to do to write your organization history, to write your evaluation section, et cetera, et cetera. So those are just ones, and I think those links are being dropped in the chat. And again, encourage any others that are favorites of anybody on the call today to please share those as well, because there are a lot of resources out there. And writing in general is something that is a muscle that needs to be exercised. So if this is something that is new for you and you're very intimidated, it's best to just start doing it and keep working at it. And then it does get easier, and it does, the more you do it, the easier it can be. So when you knock out one proposal, you'll feel energized to like knock out a few more because you'll be ready to go. I think that's it for the slide presentation, and I think we can move into some Q&A with Priya.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of really great questions. I'm going to do sort of a rapid fire one, just because we have a bunch of like small basic like application questions. So we'll go through those first. Should you include a letter of recommendation if it is not required?
This is an annoying answer, but I would say it depends. Be specific. First, check what they require and what they will accept. So if they're very clear about this is what we want you to attach and nothing else, don't throw in a letter just for kicks. If it's something where it's more open-ended, if you have a relevant letter to the request, then yes, I think that is worth including when you can.
And can I just quickly from a grantor point of view? So some grantors are consciously paring back the amount that they're asking from applicants because they're trying to like right size their applications to the size of their grants. So they might not be asking for a letter of recommendation because they don't want the applicant to have to spend their time tracking down a letter of recommendation to get their grant. And so it's in some cases it's an effort to be more generous to the grant writer themselves.
Great. I think you answered this question, but can attachment be photos to show the project? And I just felt it was worth reiterating because I think you sort of answered it in the spiel.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to Daly's point. If there's a very specific list of the attachments you can and can't include, pay attention to that. We require photos. So I think grantors are usually pretty specific about what their wants or what their needs are to make their decisions.
Yeah, I think capital projects almost always want a photo or photos. Others, it really depends, but it can be a really helpful illustration. So.
Great. Which part of the proposal components that you list is the narrative?
So that's a great question. So if you're writing your own proposal, I think everything really from goals and objectives through like the work plan and the evaluation is really all narrative, because that is telling that's like the meat of the project, right? Your org history and your background and things like that are sort of their own section, and your budget is often its own section. But really like what the project is, why you are doing it, and the steps that you are going to take to meet those goals. I would say all of that would make a traditional narrative. I think when you're laying it out, if this is something where you're doing it yourself and you're not filling out a portal, then you can. I don't have I always do it the same way kind of headers. I sort of feel out what the strongest points of that I want to be making are, and can put headers in that way. But yeah, I think your narrative is really like the bulk of like, what is this project?
Great. When reaching out to potential funders, does it matter if you email or call?
So I think it, again, probably depends funder by funder. For our grant program, we encourage people to email us for a few reasons. But we do have a phone number as well, so folks call, and that's fine as well. I think that, I think if you're on a funder's site and all they're giving you is their email address, they want you to email them. They're not looking for you to track down their number from the Yellow Pages and give them a call, would be my guidance. Haley, do you have other thoughts?
Yeah, I think email is more and more the way people reach out. But if they have a phone number listed and it's there, and sometimes picking up the phone, if you feel like you'll have an easier time explaining your project to them by just talking to them, then go ahead and pick up the phone. But yeah, I think looking to see what information they've put out there as contact information and letting that be your guide of the best way to reach out.
Great. What if your rehab project timeline depends on grants awarded, so it's difficult to identify a timeline?
That's a great question. Do you want to start, Nikki? I have thoughts.
Well, I mean, I hear that. We understand that, and a lot of what we consider, my advice would be to write the application as though assuming that you are getting the grant that you're asking for, and that if that grant comes through, this is your timeline. Because when I read a proposal, if our source of funding is the only source of funding or the primary source of funding, that's how I read it. Like, okay, this is their ideal timeline if our funding comes through, knowing that it might not, and there might need to be adjustments, or that if our process is delayed for some reason, there might need to be adjustments to the timeline.
Yeah, I would agree with that, that just write the timeline, assuming you're getting the funding you're applying for. But also sometimes when you conceive of your timeline, it doesn't necessarily have to be like January 2026. It can be month 1, or or you can break it out into periods, like planning period 3 months, implementation 6 months, like wrap up 1 month, things like that. There's different ways of crafting that timeline if you feel like you need something that's like, if you don't know when the funder's going to get back to you too, because sometimes they're really clear about when their board meets, and other times it's like you're sort of doing this like crystal ball peering to figure it out. You can break your timeline up that way so that you're less tied to a specific calendar date. If they have specific grant dates, then follow those. But again, it's always going to be what does the funder individually put out there as their guidelines.
Right. If an organization requests an introduction letter before you apply for the grant, what do you put in that letter?
Yes, so that is often referred to as an LOI, a letter of inquiry, a letter of interest, things like that. So some do require an LOI. Some use, again, a portal function where you're filling out questions to enter that initial information. If they do ask you to actually submit something, this is where it would be, short. So I would say 2 pages is usually like an LOI length, maybe 3 if it's something a lot to say. Usually written as a like business letter style. And that's something where you really want to cover who you are, right? Like, what is your organization? What is the funding you're asking for? What is the project at, like, again, kind of that real high, like the abstract, that you would, that 1 paragraph kind of elevator pitch, if you will. What is it you're asking for? Who's going to be executing it? The timeline, how much funding you're looking for, and what you really, I think, want to cover in the LOI is how your specific request aligns with their mission, so that you really spell it out for them, so that if they are only getting that letter, that they get an understanding of who you are, what the project is, and why it's relevant to them. And it is a great way to introduce yourself, especially if there's somebody that maybe you've never gotten funding from, or maybe in like your ancient history, you got funding and there's been staff turnover and things like that. But yeah, I think it's almost like a mini proposal in a way, but you want to, usually you don't want to have it be like really, really long. Something like, I think shooting for 2 pages is ideal.
Great. I'm sort of combining 2 questions. One is about, while you talk about 501c3s, does this apply to municipal government institutions or just specifically 501c3? I think I'm not 100% sure what the this is in the question, but another one was they're a 501c13. And many local entities will not allow us to register or submit because of the C13 designation. So I think they're both sort of similar questions.
I think this is where it depends on what the funder funds. Some foundations will fund like fiscally sponsored organizations. Some will not. Some will fund municipalities in different ways. Some will not. So again, I think if you're not sure about, like, be aware of what your own designation is. And then if you're not sure, reach out to them and clarify if you're eligible or not. Again, this is something that there's not like a consistency, if you will. If you are one of those not a 501c3 and you are eligible, then everything we've said here would apply.
Two questions about example successful applications. So one was asking, where can I see an example of a historic preservation grant? So just a general example. And then someone else wanted to know successful award applications. Is that something you guys do? If someone wanted to see one, how do they get that?
Yeah, so we don't currently have examples available, though that's something that we can consider, and I'll talk to my team about. One thing that we maybe didn't discuss in the presentation is, like, there's, the example of the well-written application, and somebody in the comments said, it's both an art and a science, and that's true. It's true both of grant writing and grant making. Like, there's no, it's all an art and a science. But one thing you can do to get a sense of the kind of projects that an applicant or an organization funds, like the National Trust, after every grant round, we list who we funded, and we'll give some highlight examples of the type of funding that we do. So that at least can give you a sense of the project types. I think that in terms of like an example application, each application the project types are so different from one another. Those primary components that Haley talked about are consistent, but I'm not sure, like, finding a perfect template is, I think, one of the things that holds us back from putting one out there, to be honest.
Yeah, I think if you look at some of the books about grant writing, a lot of times they'll have examples in there as well, which can be helpful if this really is like, you're just like, I don't even know where to start. Most of those examples, or really any book on grant writing, will have like a sample paragraph of like an org history or a sample paragraph of a goals and objectives section. And so, if you just are trying to get a sense of like where to begin, that can be good. Yeah, a lot of organizations don't put out sample proposals. Interestingly, given our gathering here today, the NEH and IMLS actually do have a lot of that on their website, many of which are still there. So if you're interested in seeing some successful federal applications, a lot of times those agencies will post examples on the website, which can be useful to see the level of detail and consideration that goes into a larger proposal, even if it's not for a federal entity, but for a large foundation, it would be similar.
What are your thoughts about grant applications that note that they are applying to multiple open grant opportunities for a specific initiative at the same time? Does that impact or reduce chances of an award?
So we will often get applications across various programs for the same program, and I don't know that it does either necessarily. For us, we might look and say, okay, this applicant's applied to 3 different programs. This program is the best fit in terms of what its funding is trying to do, or its available, money that's available. So in some cases that does help. In other cases, if there are 3 different projects and they're not clear on how they all interact with each other, and sometimes it can just muddle things more. Like if there's not a clarity of how, like, if it's like, planning in, the 3 different phases, and we don't know which ones comes first, that can be confusing. So I'm not sure that's a great answer.
I would say, Funders are going to understand, I think, that you're applying to multiple sources, especially if like you have $100,000 project and they do $20,000 grants. You know, they may want to see in your budget where's the other 80 coming from. And so saying that you have pending proposals with these other funders is fine to speak to. If you are in the happy problem to have of you get all the grants and you have actually more money than you needed for the project, that's a situation where I would assess what a scope change and have conversations with your funders, because it may be that you're able to extend the project, you're able to do more with it. That's again, that would be a great problem to have. But you know, if I'm putting a budget together and I'm not just doing my expenses, I want to show my income, and I may be showing that, you know, we already have this much set aside, we're going to cover this much from our operating for like the staff that's up there, and then we've got this pending proposal, and then we've got this proposal that I'm submitting right now. So sometimes funders will also ask for a list of your current supporters. That's not uncommon, and really that's about showing that you are, you know, an organization that is receiving funding. I hate it because it's kind of like a chicken and egg when you're a small organization. And it's like you want to get that first grant, and to get that first grant, you need to show all the other grants you got. But some funders, I think, do want to see that because it shows a little bit of a stamp of approval by other organizations. It shows that you've successfully stewarded other grants before, which gives them a sense of security of giving their money to you. So I think just be prepared for that and include it as it makes sense. And I'm sorry if there's a lot of noise because there's a lot of thunder happening right outside my window right now.
Yeah, and sorry, Haley's answer was much better than mine, because I was thinking about it like them applying to us for a number of things. But yes, we ask for you to show other sources of either anticipated or secured funding. So we want to know where other money might be coming from, and we understanding that you're anticipating or you're requesting however much money, likelihood you're not going to get everything. So we know that. Again,
Yeah, and
really art and science kind of comes in.
Yeah, sorry. So that last response from Haley and you, Nikki, that was one of the other questions, was asking about, is it helpful to include the history of grants we have received? And so I think that captures perfectly. Melissa, I think you asked that. If that's not what you're asking, feel free to jump in and ask it again, and I'll try and catch it. I know we only have a few minutes left. I just wanted to maybe one last one. Okay. Having been both a grant writer and a funder, can you speak to the importance of cultivating a relationship with a funding organization?
I mean, fundraising is relationships. It really is. And you know, I came to fundraising sort of as a mid-career switch. And if you had told me I was going to be doing this early in my career, I would have thought you were crazy, because it sounded awful to have to talk to people about money. But when you realize that fundraising is really sharing what you're passionate about and getting people on board, and you do that by inviting people to stuff. You do that by having conversations about the work that you're doing. You do that by, you know, bringing people together, not just to ask them for money, but to bring them together to get to know your organization better. And it's really valuable. And it's a way to also, you know, have them see your organization, like the full perspective, introduce them to the people who are doing the work. I always joke with my colleagues, like, they don't want to talk, none of the funders want to talk to me. They want to talk to the people who are out like in the field doing the work. So I'm always like, come meet the architect, come meet the interpretive guide, you know. But it really is important, because it is so much about, at the end of the day, it's people reading the proposals. And so it's very much a people business.
Yeah. And remember that as a funder, the job is to give away money. Like, there's money, they're trying to find the best fit for that money. So that's, you know, building those relationships, that's how you can help figure that helps the funder do their job as well.
Right. So we did not get to all the questions. I will send Nikki and Haley the ones we didn't get to. And if we're able to, we will contact the people directly. But it is 3:01 and I want to be conscious of everyone's time. So we have a couple announcements to close things out. First of all, this is just one of many different things the National Trust does for people working in preservation. We have our annual conference in Milwaukee this September. There is a live and a virtual component, and one of the panels is around fundraising, which will be part of the virtual piece of the conference if you can't make it there in person. We also, if you're interested in the legal side of things and what's happening there, on Wednesday, November 5th in DC, we'll be having the National Preservation Law Conference. Registration should be open shortly for that as well. That also has a virtual component. Next slide. And then, like I mentioned earlier, our last session in this series in the summer, even though we're going to reschedule the fundraising one at some point, is leveraging LinkedIn for stronger online networking. Dave Ferguson, who did the first session, will be online to talk about best strategies for that. I hope you come. And finally, because we are all here because things are happening in the government relations space, we want to reemphasize savingplaces.org/action-center as a place to learn more about how you can take action to impact what is happening at the federal level. We have a number of different things out there, including around funding for the Historic Preservation Fund, which is really important right now. And you can sign up for our newsletter that will give you up-to-date information about what's happening in that space. You can also, for the National Trust grants, go to savingplaces.org/grants, and there's also an email list for all of our grants if you would like to follow along and find out when our funding opportunities open. And I think that's it. Thank you so much for being here today. Like I mentioned, I'll be putting the slide deck and all the links that people shared on in the follow-up email and on the page where all of the materials will be living, but that'll be in the follow-up email, and we shared it in the chat already. But thank you so much for coming, and I hope to see you on August 7th for our next session. And thank you so much.